So we're in Parsha Shemos, page 293, and it begins. And these are the names of the children of Israel who were coming to Egypt with Yaakov. Each man in his household came, and it lists the sons of Yaakov. And the commentaries ask that we just left off Parshas Vayechi, last week's Parsha, and the end of the book of Bereshis. It also listed all the sons of Yaakov who came to Egypt. So why does it need to list them again? Why does it list it there and list it here? So the Ramban answers. Ramban explains the pattern of how the books are broken up, the books of the Torah. That there are 5 books in the Torah: Bereshis, Shemos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim. And he says Bereshis, which is usually translated as Genesis, is the book of the creation. And creation implies 2 different things. There's the creation of the world, which is how the book of Bereshit starts, and the creation of the Jewish people. So it begins with, and in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and concludes with the Jewish people as a family, 70 people going down to Egypt. That's the conclusion. So it lists their names as the conclusion of the story of the creation of the Jewish people. And the book of Shemos, though, is about exile and redemption. And therefore, it begins with the story of the exile in Egypt. The beginning of the story of the exile is also them going down to Egypt. So it lists the names of the sons of Yaakov who went down to Egypt with him. So both really require a list of names. And as an aside, the book of Shemos, the Ramban says, concludes really with the giving of the Torah and the building of the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle. And the reason for that is, like we said, it's the book of exile and redemption. And the same way that the Bereshis, there's a dichotomy in the creation. There's the creation of the world and there's the creation of the Jewish people. So in the book of Shemos as well, there's a dichotomy of exile and redemption. There's the physical exile and redemption. That's the exile to Egypt and our physical removal from the land of Egypt. And there's also the spiritual the spiritual subjugation that we experienced in Egypt and the spiritual redemption. So the spiritual subjugation was that the Jewish people were somewhat, not completely, but somewhat assimilated in Egypt and may have worshipped idols as well, worshipped the deities of Egypt. And the ultimate redemption from Egypt was the spiritual redemption we received when we did tshuva. We atoned for our sin of the golden calf, and through that, we're allowed to build the Mishkan, build the tabernacle where Hashem rests his presence amongst us. And that's the ultimate redemption story of the Jewish people. So that's how the book of Shemos ends. Okay, so it continues in verse 6 on page 293. Yosef died and all his brothers and that entire generation. The children of Israel were fruitful, teemed, increased, and became strong, very, very much so, and the land became filled with them. And in verse 8, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Yosef. He said to his people, behold the people, the children of Israel are more numerous and stronger than we. Come, let us outsmart it, lest it become numerous. And it may be that if war will occur, it too may join our enemies and wage war against us and go up from the land. So first of all, this thing of a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Yosef. It's very difficult to imagine that the king did not know Yosef. Yosef was the viceroy of Egypt a short time ago. So how is it that a new king would not have known such recent history of who the ruler of Egypt was? And our sages say that what it means he did not know Yosef means that he did not, he acted as if he did not know Yosef. He should have been grateful to the Jewish people for having supplied the ruler and the one really who saved the land of Egypt, who advised them how to overcome the famine, how to survive the famine, and but he didn't. He acted as if he didn't know Yosef. The Klayaka, though, says a very nice word, that what it means is that he did not know Yosef, that he didn't know the story and didn't know really, he didn't take a lesson from the story of Yosef. And that story of Yosef was that Yosef was oppressed by his brothers. Yosef's brothers were jealous of him and they oppressed him. They tried to kill him. They sold him into slavery, but everything they did backfired on them. and accomplish the exact opposite of what they were trying to accomplish. That when the brothers heard Yosef's dreams, Yosef had these dreams about how these dreams of grandeur, that he was going to be king over them, they would be subjugated to him and bow down to him. And in order to prevent that from happening, they first planned on killing him, and then they sold him into slavery in Egypt, which we've mentioned. It was not a great avenue for promotion. But somehow, he, through obviously Hashem's machinations, he became the viceroy of Egypt, and exactly what they did to prevent him from ruling over them turned out to be exactly what caused him to rule over them. So what they did backfired and caused the exact opposite of what they were planning. And that was the story of Yosef. And that story, this Paro did not know. He did not know Yosef. He did not take into account the history of Yosef. And what he did to the Jewish people ended up backfiring on him as well. It says that he said about the Jewish people, they're more numerous and stronger than we. So his plan was, they're more numerous and stronger, so let's make them slaves. So that will cause them to become less numerous. That will cause them to drive their numbers down and make them weaker. But instead, as it continues on page 295, verse 12, it states, but as much as they would afflict it, so they would increase and so it would spread out. In exactly the same way the brothers' plans for Yosef backfired, so Paro's plans for the Jewish people backfired. They tried to keep their numbers down and make them weaker by oppressing them, but as the more he oppressed them, the more numerous they became and the more stronger they became in a sense. Okay, and the Ramban says that the reason why the statement that Paro made in verse 9 was, verse 10, come let us outsmart it. What's this outsmarted? Let us act wisely with them. What he was saying is that he couldn't go ahead and just say, let's kill the Jews, or let's go enslave them, because if he would have said that, the people wouldn't have gone along with it. It would be, people would just view it like, this is a travesty. This is not just, this is, the king's committing atrocities. This is genocide. And the people would not have gone along with it. Politically, he wouldn't have been able to do it. So he said, let us act wisely, meaning instead of killing them, we'll gradually introduce them into slavery, as the Medrash says, that at first, he didn't even make the Jews work. They announced that there would be a tax, that all the Gerim, or so the Medrash says, all the Egyptians, everybody in Egypt, would do some work for the kingdom. And this was like a tax that every person had to do some work. And they announced this, and it was a very patriotic endeavor. Let's help out Egypt as citizens or as residents of Egypt. We have to help the country. And as the Egyptians started filtering out and stopped working, the Jews were forced to continue working until they were slaves. And that was the wisdom that he exhibited, the come let us outsmart it. That was the outsmarting that he did. So on page 295, so they appointed taskmasters over it in order to afflict it with their burdens. It built storage cities for Paro, Pisum, and Ramses. And then, like as we said in verse 12, but as much as they would afflict it, so it would increase, so it would spread out, and they became disgusted because of the children of Israel. And in verse 13, the Egyptians enslaved the children of Israel with crushing harshness. They embittered their lives with hard work, with mortar and bricks, and with every labor of the field. All their labors that they performed with them were with crushing harshness. So they put this incredible crushing load on the Jewish people. Okay, and then in verse 15, that takes it to the next level. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of the first was Shiphrah and the name of the second was Puah. Our sages say that these were actually Yocheved and Miriam, Yocheved being the daughter of Levi, the eventual mother of Moshe, and Miriam, her daughter, Moshe's sister, and said, when you deliver the Hebrew women and you see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you are to kill him, and if it is a daughter, he shall live. But the midwives feared God, did not do as the king of Egypt spoke to them, and they caused the boys to live. So they did not follow Paro's order. And the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing that you have caused the boys to live? And the midwives said to Paro, because the Hebrew women are unlike the Egyptian women, for they are experts. Before the midwife comes to them, they have given birth, that they know how to deliver without the midwife's help. So by the time we get there, they have the baby already, and we can't do it. And the Ramban says this also illustrates that Paro was not willing, politically willing, to just say, kill the Jews, kill the Jewish babies. Because if he would have done that, he would have been, once again, people would be talking about the atrocities that this Pharaoh is committing. So instead, he went privately to the Jewish midwives. He didn't just make a law that all the babies have to be killed. He went secretly to the midwives and told them, this is what you have to do, but not for public consumption. And that's why the midwives were saying, just we didn't get there in time, and we couldn't do it secretly. And in verse 20, Hashem benefited the midwives. The people increased and became very strong. And it was because the midwives feared God that he made them houses. And our sages say, what are these houses that we're referring to? The houses were the houses of, house could be in Hebrew, could mean a family as well. And it means that they had kings come from them, and Kohanim and Leviim come from them. And Kohanim and Leviim obviously came from Yocheved, and that Aaron was all the Kohanim are descendants of Aaron, who was Yocheved's son. And kings came from Miriam, from Yocheved's daughter, so from her as well, that Miriam was a great-great-great-grandmother of King David. So that's the lineage of the kings of the Jewish people. Okay, so moving on, page 297, in verse 22, it says, Paro commanded his entire people, saying, every son that will be born into the river you shall throw him, and every daughter you shall keep alive. So here, our sages say that the astrologers of Paro and his magicians told him that they could see in the stars that it's imminent that the one who's going to who's going to end his kingdom will be born. So Paro commanded the people, saying that they have to throw every boy in the river. And not only that, some of the commentaries say, it says they commanded his entire people. So at this point, he abandoned all pretenses and made this a public law. And it doesn't say anything specifically about the Jews. Whereas before, when he was telling the midwives, it says that when you deliver the Hebrew women, you shall see them on the birth stool, kill all the boys. Here it doesn't say anything about the Jews specifically. It says, every son that will be born into the river you shall throw him. And some of the commentaries say that it was referring to even the Egyptian sons, that for this time period, the national decree was every son, every boy born has to be thrown into the Nile, because it wasn't clear, the astrologers weren't clear if this would be a Hebrew boy or an Egyptian boy who would end Paro's kingdom. So he just made it a blanket rule. Everybody has to be thrown in the Nile. Okay, so now in chapter 2, on page 297, a man went from the house of Levi, and he took a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was good, and she hid him for 3 months. She could not hide him any longer, so she took from him a wicker basket and smeared it with clay and pitch. She placed the child into it and placed it among the reeds at the bank of the river. His sister stationed herself at a distance to know what would be done with him. So here it just gives anonymous, it doesn't tell us their names. It's a man from the house of Levi, and he took a daughter of Levi. Sages understand this daughter of Levi to be literally a daughter of Levi, not just a daughter of the tribe of Levi, and that is Yocheved, who we mentioned before. And the man was Amram, and this is Moshe. And we see later on that it gives the lineage that these were Moshe's. It was Moshe who was the one who was born. These are his parents. Rabbi Feinstein comments that it doesn't mention their names. And usually the Torah will give the name of the parents. Here's just a person from Levi, a woman, a daughter of Levi, had this baby. He turned out to be Moshe. Once he was the leader of the Jewish people, much later it actually gives Moshe's lineage. And it actually mentions that he's the son of Amram and Yocheved. And that's actually mentioned on page 323 is where it mentions that Amram and Yocheved are his parents. And Ramesh Feinstein says that's because when a child's born, they can have all the potential in the world. But parents can't really take pride in them until they're grown up and actually achieve their potential. So at this point in time, this was a child that was destined to be Moshe. He was destined to lead the Jewish people out of Egypt and bring the Torah to them and to be the great leader of the Jewish people. But he wasn't that yet. He was just a baby now. So therefore, the Torah is hinting that there's no pride in having the parents' names attached to him because he's just a baby. He hasn't achieved anything. Once he's appointed as the leader of the Jewish people later in page 323 in Parsha Ve'era, then it says that Amram took Yocheved as his wife, and they gave birth to Aaron and Moshe. Now that he's the lead, that he achieved his potential, now they could say, this is my son, I'm his parent. Okay, so another thing that's mentioned here is that it says a man went from the house of Levi and he took a daughter of Levi. And the commentaries ask, what does it mean that he went? It could have very easily said that a man from the house of Levi took a daughter of Levi, married a daughter of Levi. What does it mean he went and took? But the Ramban comments that whenever it says that someone went and did something, it means that like they're doing something new. They're doing something, they're kind of fighting against something. And the Medrash says that originally he left his wife, that Amram and Yocheved separated because because of this decree that Paro made that every boy has to be thrown in the Nile. So Amram said that how could I have children that maybe would be a boy and have him killed? It's better if we just separate and don't have any children. And his daughter Miriam went to him and said that your decree is and when Amram did this, Amram was the leader of the Jewish people, and all the Jews followed him in this, and all the families separated. And so because of this, his daughter Miriam said to him that your decree is worse than Paro's, because Paro's decree was on just the boys. He'll only kill the boys, so there won't be any Jewish boys. But your decree is even on the girls, because now no children will be born to the Jewish people, because whereas with Paro, all the boys that were born would be killed, but at least the girls would survive. Now there won't be any children being born. And he admitted to his daughter and followed his daughter. That's what it means that he went, meaning he went after the advice of his daughter and remarried his daughter Miriam, and remarried his wife Yocheved. Okay, so they sent Moshe. It says that the woman conceived, gave birth to a son. She thought he was good. She hid him for 3 months. She could not hide him any longer, so she took a wicker basket and sent him on the Nile. So here it says these 3 months. The Rabbeinu Bachya comments that they're a very interesting number, because we know Moshe died on the Zayin Adar, on the 7th of Adar, and he was born on the 7th of Adar as well. So if you add 3 months to that, if you add 3 months to the 7th of Adar, you get Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. And because of the way that the months work out, 3 months after the 7th of Adar would be the 6th of Sivan, which is the day that we received the Torah. So the date that Moshe was put onto the Nile 3 months after he was born is the same date that the Torah was given. So the date of his great tribulation, where as a baby he was just sent off on his own in a wicker basket floating along the Nile, just to whatever happens to him happens, that same day was the date of his greatest triumph, where he ascended to heaven and received the Torah for the Jewish people. So, and they say this is illustrate of some words of the prophets, that a person's greatest trial could become their greatest success. Okay, so it continues in verse 5. Paro's daughter went down to bathe by the river, and her maidens walked along the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her maidservant that she took it. She opened it and saw him, the child, and behold, a youth was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." And his sister said to Paro's daughter, "Shall I summon for you a wet nurse from the Hebrew women who will nurse the boy for you?" And the daughter of Paro said, "Go." And she got the baby's mother. She got Yocheved, and Yocheved was hired to nurse him. And this is another case where the commentaries, our sages say that with the righteous, not only is what they lost returned to them, but they even received more. And in this case, Yocheved thought she lost Moshe, but Moshe was returned to her for her to nurse And not only that, she was paid to nurse her own son. So she was hired to nurse her own son. So not only did she get to raise her son, she was paid for it. Okay, so now moving on. On page 299, verse 11, it happened in those days that Moshe grew up and went out to his brethren and observed their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man of his brethren. He turned this way and that and saw there was no man, so he struck down the Egyptian and hid them in the sand. In verse 13, he went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. He said to the wicked one, "Why would you strike your fellow?" And the man replied, "Who appointed you as a dignitary, a ruler, and a judge over us? Do you propose to murder me as you murdered the Egyptian?" Moshe was frightened, and he thought, "Indeed, the matter is known." Paro heard about this matter, and he sought to kill Moshe. So Moshe fled from before Paro and settled in the land of Midian. He sat by a well. So the who is it? A comments. I think it's Rabbeinu Bach. Rabbi Shimon Schwab asks that how could the Hebrew man replied, "Who appointed you as a dignitary, a ruler, and a judge over us?" Rabbi Shimon Schwab asks, what kind of question is that? Moshe was raised in Paro's palace as the daughter of Basia, as the son of Basia, as the son of the king's daughter, the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. Of course, he was appointed as the ruler over them because he was a prince. Moshe was raised a prince in the palace. So what kind of question was this? Who appointed you as a ruler over us? He was a ruler. He was a dignitary. And to that, Rav Shimon Schwab answers that this moment, this person had such intense hatred of Moshe that he saw to the depths of his soul, and he saw that he was a Jew. And he said, "You're not a prince, you're a Jew." And he felt that because he had such intense hatred for him in that moment, that he just sensed anything negative, anything that he could use against him, he was able to sense through his hatred.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Hey, when it says that Moshe looked at this man and he caused him to die, he hit him in the sand.
Yes.
So he killed the man, but could you elaborate on that? Because I think, actually Hashem killed the man because Moses prayed to God about this.
Yes. So the way the commentaries say it, the Medrash says, let's see if I can find it here. I think it's on the verse. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, so in verse 14, it says, "Who appointed you as a dignitary, ruler, and a judge over us? Do you propose to murder me as you murdered the Egyptian?" The way it's spoken out in Hebrew, the Hebrew in Pasuk Yudalid is, "Halahargeni ata omer." The word propose, the English word propose, the Hebrew is, "Are you going to say to kill me?" And our sages derive from there. The Medrash says that he said to kill the Egyptian, meaning he killed them through his word. Not that he struck him physically, but he killed him through he pronounced the name of God, which caused him to die. So, yes. So, and also it says that he looked to and fro, he looked this way and that, and then killed him. Not that he was looking to see if anybody was watching, but the Medrash says that he looked into this person's destiny and saw that nobody righteous and no convert was destined to descend from him. But yes, the Medrash does say he didn't kill him physically. He didn't kill him through a physical strike. He killed him by pronouncing the name of Hashem.
Well, in the Ten Commandments with the "thou shalt not kill" or murder, it says it's a fine line there. It's
a fine line. There's an exception to that. Do not murder, and that's when someone's life is in danger. That there's a law of a rodif in the Torah. A rodif means someone who's chasing, meaning someone who's in the process of trying to kill someone else. In which case, anyone could get up and kill him first. And here he was beating a Jew to death. The Medrash says actually about this person is that this Egyptian it says the Egyptian who was striking a Hebrew man, he was beating a Hebrew man. What happened there was that there was a woman who was a little too talkative, and she befriended and talked to the Egyptians. And this Egyptian man went into the house at night, and they didn't have electric lighting, so it was very dark, and pretended to be the husband. And when the husband came home, he realized what happened, and that's why this Egyptian man was beating him. So he was beating him to death. So Moshe stood up for him to save his life, in which case there wouldn't be any prohibition against murder. Okay, another thing that the commentaries say here is that it says, once again, in verse 14, Moshe was frightened and he thought, indeed, the matter is known. So what's the matter is known? Either the matter that he killed the Egyptian. The matter says, though, that he was saying something deeper. He was saying that the matter is known why the Jews were enslaved. Why did it have to be, meaning he looked at the Jews and didn't see a reason why they should, spiritually, why they should be enslaved, until he saw this. And then he said, now I know. Now it's known why they're enslaved. And that is that people must be talking. Meaning, how would these two people know that he had killed the Egyptian? It must be that people are talking about it. Someone saw it and told someone else, and it's a rumor going around, which means that people are saying ill of others, that they're speaking lashon hara, they're speaking ill of others, and that's how these people would have heard about it. So he said, now I know why they're enslaved, because they have this sin. They have the sin that they speaking gossip or speaking ill of other people. So it says that and Moshe fled before Paro and settled in the land of Midian. He sat by a well. And I'll skip over this a little bit, but the minister of Midian had his daughters were shepherding his sheep. He had 7 daughters, and they were the shepherds, and usually they were bullied by the male shepherds, and they had to wait. They had to take water last from the well to water their sheep. And Moshe came and saw them and got the water from them first, and so they brought him home. And or he actually summoned them to bring them home. And in verse 21, the bottom 299, verse 21, Moshe desired to dwell with the man. He gave his daughter Zipporah to Moshe. So she gave birth to a son, and she named him Gershom, for he said, I've been a stranger in a foreign land. And during those, and then in verse 23, on page 301, during those many days it happened that the king of Egypt died. And the children of Israel groaned because of the hard work. They cried out. Their outcry because of the work went up to Hashem. Hashem heard their moaning, and Hashem remembered his covenant with Avram, with Yitzchak, with Yaakov. Hashem saw the children of Israel, and Hashem knew. And I'll come back to this verse that Hashem saw and Hashem knew what that means. But it says, this is introduced in that during those many days. So what does that mean, during those many days? So the Ramban says it's referring to the time that Moshe was away, that Moshe had fled. That he says that it says that Moshe, as Moshe grew up, and he went out and saw this Egyptian, beating up the Jew, and he killed the Egyptian. However he killed the Egyptian. Then he saw these 2 people fighting, and the 2 people and one of them mentioned, it referenced him having killed the Egyptian. So, and then he had to flee from Paro. So it was very quick from the time that he grew up and he fled. When he stood before Paro, the Torah tells us, when he came back and stood before Paro, he was 80 years old already. So he was gone a very long time. The Ramban says that I think he quotes the Medrash that he was 12 years old when he fled. But the Ramban says, it says that he was a young man. He couldn't have been more than 20. So the least amount of time he could have been gone was 60 years. That we have a very big skip in the timeline. It says that he fled Egypt, and then it mentions him going to Midian and marrying Yisro's daughter, and then he's sent back to Egypt. So that's at 60 to 70 years time that we're kind of skipping over, and that's that it was during those many days that this happened in the meantime over that length of time. And the Ramban says that it makes sense that this incident when he went to Midian and met Yisro and married his daughter would have been towards the end of the time, towards the end of those 60 to 70 years that he was gone, because it seems that he had a young son on the way back. He had a son who was 8 days old when he was traveling back, so he wouldn't have been there for 60 years.
What does that have to do? What does the king or Paro dying? I mean, what did that have to do with the way?
It's just saying that's what happened in the meantime, and that was the trigger for him being sent back.
Okay.
That they groaned because of that. They cried out to Hashem, and because Hashem heard their cries and Hashem knew. Okay. But it does say here that the king of Egypt died, the children of Israel groaned because of the work. And the commentaries say that what's as kind of what you were asking, what's the connection between the two? What's the connection between the king dying and they're groaning from the work? And they say that when you have a king, so an evil king that oppresses the people, like this Paro oppressed the Jews, he made them into slaves. So they may have this like great hope that like right now they're oppressed, but they're just waiting for that king to be gone. They're waiting for him to die. And when they'll have a new administration and maybe things will improve. But when he died and things didn't improve, they got worse. So then they just lost hope. This is like, it's permanent, that like we don't have that change of administration to look forward to because administration changed and things just got worse. So at that point, they were like, we have nothing to look forward to, and they cried out to Hashem, and they were answered. And Hashem's reaction in verse 25, if you will, it says, God saw the children of Israel and God knew. So I think this is from the Beis Halevi that he said, what does that mean? He saw and he knew. It means that he saw that the Jewish people were worshiping idols, that they were somewhat assimilated with the Egyptians and they were worshiping idols. But Hashem knew, meaning Hashem looked into the depths of their heart and into their motivations. And Hashem knew that they were only doing it because of the oppression. But if not for the oppression, they would be righteous. And because of that, he redeemed them. And this is the introduction to the redeeming. So on page 301, verse 1, Moshe was shepherding the sheep of Yisrael's father-in-law, and the priest of Midian. He guided the sheep far into the wilderness. He arrived at the mountain of Hashem towards Chorev. This is Mount Sinai. An angel of Hashem appeared to him in a blaze of fire from amid the bush. He saw, and behold, the bush was burning in the fire, but the bush was not consumed. And our sages say, who is it? Yeah, the commentaries say that this was a mashal, this was a metaphor for the Jews in Egypt, that the fire of the Egyptian oppression was burning on them, but it wasn't consuming them, that they were, not only were they not being destroyed, they were actually increasing. And that was the bush that was on fire, but wasn't burning. So in verse 3, Moshe thought, I will turn aside now and look at this great sight. Why will the bush not be burned? Hashem saw that he turned aside to see, and Hashem called out to him from amid the bush, and he said, Moshe, Moshe. And he replied, here I am. He said, do not come closer to here. Remove your shoes from your feet, for the place upon which you stand is holy ground. And turning the page to 303, verse 6, and he said, I am Hashem, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Moshe hid his face, for he was afraid to gaze towards God. And then it continues that he said, I see the oppression, and I'm going to send you to take the Jews out of Egypt. So backing up to this vision. So I'll just, the Malbim explains this whole incident, this whole vision, that it says that Moshe said, I will turn aside and look at this great sight. And then Hashem saw that he turned aside to see, and Hashem called out to him from amid the bush. That the implication is that Hashem called to him because he turned aside. If he wouldn't have turned aside, Hashem wouldn't have called to him. It was a result, that was the cause. And the Malbim explains that Moshe, this was a vision that Moshe saw. It says that an angel of God appeared to him. That means that not that he saw it physically, but it was an appearance, it was a vision. And he said, I will turn aside. The Malbim understands this to mean that Moshe recognized that this wasn't a physical entity. This was a spiritual vision. So he said, I will turn aside, meaning I'll turn aside from my physical body and look at this in a spiritual way. I'll look at it with my thoughts, with my soul, not with my eyes, not with my body. And that's the turning aside, that he was turning aside from a physical look to a spiritual look. And that's where once he did that, Hashem called to him and said, and he said, do not come closer to here, remove your shoes from your feet, for the place upon which you stand is holy ground. And the Malbim explains this idea is that shoes are a metaphor for the body, because the same way that shoes protect our bodies from the ground, meaning the ground could be damaging to our feet, and shoes are a layer that separates between us and the ground to protect us, so the body is to the soul, that the soul is a spiritual entity that doesn't really belong in the physical world. So when we're living in the physical world, our soul is kind of out of place. It's a spiritual thing. It doesn't belong here. And the body is the kind of the what separates it and protects it from the physical world. And so it's like the shoe to the so the body is like the shoe to the soul. And no pun intended. And he says also, just as an aside, that the other place really where we find, besides in holy places where people are told to take the shoe off their feet, and he says this is to mean that you should set your soul should leave your body, meaning you should have an out-of-body experience, allow yourself to leave all physical sensations and really have your soul leave your body, and experience this purely spiritually from your soul, not with your body at all. And that's expressed by taking your feet out of your shoes, taking your shoes off. So too, he says that the other case where we have, shoes are involved is the mitzvah of chalitza. And that is in a case of a levirate marriage where someone has in the case of a levirate marriage where let's say a man dies without any children. So there's a mitzvah for his brother to marry his wife, and the son that we have, it says they'll call him after the original husband. If they would not perform this, if he does not want to do this mitzvah and does not want to do yibum, he doesn't want to marry her. So then there's a mitzvah of chalitza. That's a procedure where they take off his shoe and she spits in it in the direction. And so there's a taking off of a shoe as part of a mitzvah. And the Malbim explains the idea behind this is that this is a Kabbalistic idea. The Ramban hints towards this as well. But that he says that when a person dies, when a man dies and he doesn't have any children, so his mission feels unfulfilled in the world. That he dies without children, he's not leaving anything behind, and his soul is not at rest. And in a sense, his soul is like looking for that fulfillment and sticks around in the world. So if they do yibum, so his brother marries his wife, his widow, and when they have a son, that son actually becomes receives the soul of her dead ex-husband, and is actually a reincarnation. It has the soul of him, so it could have a body again. And that's, in a sense, what he's doing is the brother is supplying a shoe for the soul, supplying a body for the soul of his brother. But when, if he does not want to do yibum, he does not want to do this mitzvah, this levirate marriage, which, just to be clear, we don't do that nowadays. Instead, in every case, we do chalitza. There are technical reasons for that. But we do this second procedure with the shoe instead. So he takes off the shoe to symbolize that you're not, that you're leaving your brother's soul without a body. Okay, so moving on. On page 303, in verse 6, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Avram, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov. Moshe had his face for he was afraid to gaze towards God. And like we said, he's going to send Moshe to redeem the Jewish people. And in verse 11 on page 303, Moshe replied to Hashem, who am I that I should go to Paro and that I shall take the children of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, for I shall be with you, and this is your sign that I have sent you. When you take the people out of Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. And in verse 13 on page 305, Moses said to Hashem, behold, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your forefather has sent me to you, and they will say, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And Hashem answered Moshe, I shall be as I shall be. And he said, so shall you say to the children of Israel, I shall be has sent me to you. And I'll go, this very cryptic, I'll go back to it. But in verse 15, it says, God said further to Moshe, so shall you say to the children of Israel, Hashem, the God of your forefathers, the God of Avram, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov has dispatched me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my remembrance from generation to generation. So this was very cryptic conversation. First of all, what was Moshe's question? They asked, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And Hashem answered Moshe, I shall be as I shall be. So the Ramban explains, and this seems to be the others explain as well, that his question was, with what name? What is his name of the one who sent you? Meaning the names of Hashem symbolize the way that Hashem acts towards us. For example, one name of Hashem, the 4-letter name of Hashem that we don't say, symbolizes Hashem acting towards us with mercy. Whereas Elokim is the name of Hashem we use when Hashem is acting with compassion, when Hashem's acting with justice, with strict judgment towards us. And so he was asking, when they asked me in what role really is Hashem redeeming us, so what should I answer? And Hashem says, I shall be as I shall be. And this our sages interpret to mean, I shall be with them in exile, in this exile, and I will be with them in exile, in their exile in the future. And the Medrash says that that's what this means. And he said further, so shall you say to the children of Israel, I shall be has sent me to you. There, instead of I shall be as I shall be, he said, just I shall be once. Meaning that I'll be with you in this exile, not that I'll be with you in future exile, future troubles. And the Medrash explains that Moshe responded to Hashem when Moshe says that you shall tell them, I shall be as I shall be with them in this exile and with this trouble, and I'll be in future troubles. Moshe said that they're in such trouble now, they don't want to hear about other troubles. They don't want to hear about future troubles. It's enough for them to think about this one. And Hashem said, you're right, just tell them, I'll be with them in this. I'll be with them in just tell them I'm with them in this trouble. The Ramban though says in a Kabbalistic sense that I shall be as I shall be, which like I mentioned is a name of Hashem, is a statement that the name of Hashem, that Hashem is dealing with them with the justice that's hidden in the mercy. It's the din shebe rachamim, the justice that's within the mercy. And the Malbim explains the connection there. He has a beautiful explanation for how this all fits together. And that is that Hashem told Avram when he told him that his descendants will be in a land that's not oppressed, in a land that's not theirs. So he said that they were going to be oppressed in a land that's not theirs for 400 years. But they were being taken, at this point, they weren't in Egypt for 400 years. They were only enslaved for 210 years. So how is Hashem taking them out early? And they answer, our sages answer that this is kind of like an installment plan. It's a payment plan. That because the exile was so harsh and because of their outcry, Hashem's taking us out of Egypt now, but we'll have to pay it down the line. And really all the troubles that the Jews will experience later in our history is a fulfillment of the time that we're missing from the enslavement in Egypt. Those 190 years, more years that we were destined to be enslaved in Egypt. So we're still paying that to this day in the troubles that we have in exile. So, and kind of like an installment plan. Instead of paying it all at once, we pay it over time. So the Malbim says that is exactly what Rashi brought from our sages, which is that's what it means. I shall be as I shall be. I will be with them in this exile, and I'll be with them in future troubles. That was decreed now. That there will be future troubles for him to be there with us. That was decreed now, and that is the din sheberachmim. That's the justice, the strict justice that's hidden in the mercy, meaning that Hashem is being merciful with us. This is the role that Hashem is taking us out, that he's being merciful with us, taking us out of Egypt now, but there's some justice, strict justice hidden in there that we're going to have to pay for it down the line. Okay, so Hashem is going to take us out. And at the bottom of page 305, verse 18, it states, they will heed your voice. You and the elders of Israel shall come to the king of Egypt and say to him, Hashem, the God of the Hebrews, happened upon us. And now please let us go on a 3-day journey in the wilderness on page 307. And we shall bring offerings to Hashem our God. I know that the king, and then he said in verse 19, I know that the king of Egypt will not allow you to go except through a strong hand. I shall stretch out my hand and I shall strike Egypt with all my wonders that I shall perform in its midst. And after that, he will send you out. I will grant this people favor in the eyes of Egypt, etc. And you will empty out Egypt. They'll give you lots of stuff as you leave Egypt. And in chapter 4 on page 307, Moshe responded and said, but they will not believe me, not heed my voice. For they will say, Hashem did not appear to you. What proof will I have? And in verse 2, Hashem said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. He said, cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, it became a snake. Moshe fled from it, and Hashem said to Moshe, stretch out your hand and grasp its tail. He stretched out his hand, grasped it tightly, and it became a staff in his palm, so that they shall believe that Hashem, the God of their forefathers, appeared to you, the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov. So that's one sign that he gave him, as he told him, throw your staff on the ground, and it will become a snake. And that's the first sign. And on page 309, verse 6, so Hashem said further to him, bring your hand down to your bosom. And he brought it to his bosom, and he withdrew it. And behold, his hand was leprous like snow. He said, return your hand to your bosom. He returned his hand to his bosom. Then he removed it from his bosom, and behold, it reverted to be like flesh. And in verse 8, it shall be that if they do not believe you and do not heed the voice of the first sign, they will believe the voice of the latter sign. And in verse 9, it shall be if they do not believe even these two signs, do not heed your voice. You shall take from the water of the river, pour it out in the dry land. The water you shall take from the river will become blood when it's on dry land. So the Rabbi Bacha asked, why do we need these two signs? Meaning the blood, the Nile becoming blood was the first of the Makkos, the first of the plagues to strike the Egyptians. But why do we need two signs? There's throwing down the staff and his sticking his hand in the shirt and coming out leprous. Why do we need both signs? Why is one not sufficient? And to that he answers that there's something different about each of these two signs. And that is that the first sign, when he throws the staff down, he's taking an inanimate object, a dry stick, a dry piece of wood, and it's turning into a living snake. So he's taking an inanimate object and bringing it to life. Whereas when he stuck his hand and to his shirt and brought out leprous, what he's taking is taking a living thing, his hand, and making it dead. He's taking it out. The leprosy causes people's extremities to just die, that their limbs die and rot away. So he showed him first that Hashem's allowing him to bring the dead back to life, and Hashem's allowing him to cause the living to die. And that was a sign that he's performing two different things in his mission. That first of all, he's bringing the Jewish people who are dead in the water, they're just a nation that's enslaved, and bringing them to life, giving them life, and causing them to be a flourishing nation, and taking the Egyptians, who were the most powerful superpower in the world at the time, and causing them to be a dead nation, completely decimating their land. Okay, and then Moshe said, he said that I'm not a person of speaking, I'm not a great speaker, and Hashem had Aaron go with him. Okay, so this is what they did. So I'll skip a while, page 313, chapter 5. In verse 1, afterwards, Moshe and Aaron came and said to Paro, so this is him fulfilling his mission. Hashem told him, go to Paro. He went to Paro. And so said Hashem, the God of Israel, send out my people that they may celebrate me in the wilderness. Paro replied, who is Hashem that I should heed his voice to send out Israel? I do not know Hashem, nor will I send out Israel. So he said, the God of, okay, and they told the whole story. And in verse 4, it says, the king of Egypt said to them, Moshe and Aaron, why do you disturb the people from its work? Go to your own burdens. And Paro said, behold, the people of the land are now numerous, and you would have them cease from their burdens. On page 315, verse 6. On that day, Paro ordered the taskmasters over the people and his foremen, saying, you shall no longer give straw to the people to manufacture the bricks as yesterday and before yesterday. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But the quota of bricks that they were making yesterday and before yesterday, you shall impose upon them. Do not reduce it, for they are lazy. Therefore, they cry out, saying, let us bring offerings to our God. If they're thinking about leaving and celebrating their God, they must have too much time on their hands. They're too rested. Make their work harder. And now make them build the same amount of bricks, fulfill the same quotas of work, but we're not going to give them the building materials. So they have to forage for the straw that they used to make the bricks themselves. So it says that's what they did. And in verse 12, so the people spread out through the entire land of Egypt to gather gleanings for straw. The taskmasters pressed, saying, complete your work, the daily matter each day as when there was straw, that they had to do complete the same amount of bricks as they did before they had to forage for the straw. And And in verse 17, he said, you are lazy, lazy. Therefore, you say, let us go and bring offerings to Hashem. Now go to work. Straw will not be given to you, but you must provide the quota of bricks. And on page 317, in verse 20, it says, they encountered Moshe and Aaron standing opposite them as they left Paro's presence. They said to them, may Hashem look upon you and judge. For you have made our very scent abhorrent in the eyes of Paro and the eyes of his servants to place the sword in their hands to murder us. That the Jews were angry at were angry at Moshe and Aaron for having gone to Paro and made their work harder. So they said, it's better if you wouldn't have gone and we had an easier time before you came. And in verse 22, Moshe returned to Hashem and said, my Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why have you sent me? From the time I came to Paro to speak in your name, he did evil to this people, but you did not rescue your people. And in verse 1, Hashem said to Moshe, now you will see what I shall do to Paro, for through a very strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them from his land. The Beis Yitzchak asks that, what was Moshe expecting? Was Moshe really expecting that he would go into Paro and say, God said, let the people go, and Paro said, oh, okay, go along then. What was he expecting? And Hashem told him, we read that when Hashem told Moshe what he was to do, it says that Hashem said that he's not going to listen to you. And I'll punish the Egyptian with a strong hand, I'll take them out, I'll force them to send them, but he's not going to listen to you. So what was Moshe expecting? Why was he complaining? So he answers, the Beis Yitzchak answers that Moshe was not expecting Paro to just send the Jews out just when he comes to tell him that this is what God says. And he was expecting Paro to make the work harder. Of course, that's what he was going to do. But he was expecting Paro to take a different tact. He was expecting that Paro would say, they must have too much time, they have too much energy for thinking about leaving, let's make the work harder. So they have to build more bricks. That's what he thought they would have to do. He thought that they would have to build more bricks and have more work and work harder, and that's going to kill them. But that's not what Paro did. Or I'm sorry, that'll just make them more exhausted. They won't have time to think. That's not what Paro did, though. Paro took away their building materials, which really doesn't make sense. Because to make someone work and you don't give them the materials they need to work, so you're just getting less out of it. You're not going to get as much done from them. So why would Paro do that? He didn't understand what was Paro's trying to accomplish with this. If he wanted them to work harder, make them work harder. And then he saw what was happening, that when it says that they scattered all over Egypt to forage for straw to make bricks. And what happened, that there was a shortage of straw. And whenever someone found straw, they would all jump on it, and they would be fighting over a few strands, whatever you call it, a few stalks of straw, and it caused great friction and jealousy and hatred amongst the Jews. Because they had these great tussles, they were all competing for the same straw. And because of this, this is where Moshe felt that he said to Hashem, what have you done to the Jewish people? He understood Paro's intention is he was trying to change the Jewish people to make them not worthy of redemption. He wasn't just trying to physically exhaust them, but he was trying to remove the peace and the brotherhood that existed amongst the Jewish people and cause them to hate each other and cause a lack of peace amongst them. And then Hashem wouldn't redeem them because they wouldn't be worthy of redemption. And to that Hashem responded, and that's what Moshe was complaining, that he did evil to the people, meaning he made them evil. That through this decree, now the people were fighting and there was a lack of peace. And that's Hashem responded to Moshe, now you will see what I shall do to Paro, for to a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them from his land. That is telling him that you're going to witness what what I'm going to do to Paro now, and you're going to see that that all this friction and this lack of peace was not intrinsic. It will not make an impact on them and change who they are inside. It's just temporary because of their situation right now. He said the biggest proof is that right now they're fighting over a few stalks of straw. But when they left Egypt and they crossed the Yam Suf, they crossed the Red Sea, and the Egyptians were drowned, and all the riches of the Egyptians were washed onto the shore. So we don't find there was any fighting over that. And if they were fighting over a few stalks of straw, You can imagine what kind of fighting there would be if there was really hatred and jealousy and fighting. You can imagine what kind of fighting there would be over all the gold and silver and riches of Egypt. But there was no fighting then, because the fighting was only because of the oppression. Once the oppression was gone, so there was no more fighting. And the basically explains that this is why our sages say that there's a connection between Moshe's jubilation at the Red Sea and Moshe's complaint here, that it uses the same word us by both of them. It uses the same word because there's a connection between the two. Because here Moshe complained about the fighting that the Jews exhibited, and there he saw that the triumph, that it wasn't intrinsic. And our sages also derive from here that it says, now you will see what I shall do to Paro, now as opposed to later. The later he will not see. There's something he won't see, and that he will not see the Jews enter the land of Israel. And that was his punishment for what he said. He spoke ill of the Jewish people here. And there the Beis Yitzchak explains that as well, is that they're also, right now they're in a situation of slavery and trouble and extreme pressure. That's why they're fighting. But once they conquered the land of Israel and they settled in the land of Israel, and they were able to sit peacefully in their land, then they exhibited shalom, then they exhibited peace. And that Moshe didn't merit to see because of his complaints.